if you're in a relationship where you're always battling over whose version of reality is more true or objectively true, if you are always having arguments on repeat, if you are caretaking, if you are people pleasing and over functioning, or if you're just shutting down and getting passive aggressive, you're probably dealing with power struggles in your relationship. And the reason for that is because all of these things, whether it's fighting for your position, whether it's like who's right or who's wrong, or if you are trying to get the upper hand or the moral high ground, or if you're trying to get power through silence and indirect signals, those are all related to power. And to be clear, this is not about domination. It's not like I'm saying if you have power struggles, that means that you have a conscious desire to dominate your spouse. Usually it's about safety or autonomy or identity or just being seen in the relationship. Those are usually the things that are driving power struggles. And so today I want to help you recognize how these power struggles show up in your relationship. And most importantly, we're going to get into 5 ways that you can break out of power struggles in your dynamics for good. The first thing is, and this is like the most major and obvious way that power struggles show up in a relationship, is the right or wrong trap. It's this win-lose dynamic. And this is where there's like a competitive arguing going on, scorekeeping, vying for whoever has the short end of the stick. It's interesting how people will vie for the victim position, but as a way of one-upping, right? Like because I'm getting the short end of the stick in general, or I'm noticing inequities, I'm going to take control back from what I perceive to be a one-down position. And an example would be if you're just focused on making your partner wrong. Let's say you have a difference of opinion and your goal is to show them that they're wrong. You deconstruct their arguments. You ask rhetorical questions to make a point and illustrate how absurd they're being. You are combative and you have a very countering intention behind your communication, right? It's really not about connecting. It can also be an overt attempt at control by issuing commands or ultimatums or dominating decision-making. That can happen too. Sometimes it's unconscious, sometimes it's conscious. It really depends on your history and your upbringing, but it can show up as a very direct, like, this is what we're doing. This is what makes the most sense. I know what's best. And you know that you're in this dynamic if your partner has to lose in order for you to get what you want out of the argument. If they have to be one down in order for you to win, then you're in a win-lose dynamic. This also shows up as getting into the weeds with all of the facts and you're sort of ignoring the underlying feelings or the experience of your spouse because you're really fixated on, well, that's not true because there was this one time, blah, 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 or technically that's not true because of XYZ. If you're focusing on the technicalities or the loopholes in order to basically invalidate where they're coming from so that you can win, that's going to have an adverse effect. That can create horrible power dynamics where it's really about me versus you and you don't feel like you're on the same team. And so if this is you, you're prioritizing one-upping your partner, and whether it's intentional or not, you're making that more important than the quality of your connection. Now, number 2, and I think the way that many couples go wrong is they control through caretaking. And this falls under the category of guilt tripping. This is more like covert stuff. Guilt tripping, withholding affection, subtle manipulation. It could be in the form of you're monitoring them, you're checking in on them all the time, you're hyper tuned into them, and it's out of expressed concern for them, right? It might be about their safety. I'm just making sure I know where you are at all times to make sure that you're safe. Or you're presenting it like it's for their sake because you care about them, but it's really about you and your own fears. An example would be, let's say you're doing everything around the house because you don't really trust them to do it right. And maybe it's just that you feel like, well, I have the time, I'm going to do it. And it looks like it's a form of service, or it looks like it's a favor that you're doing them, but really it's a form of control because you have a stake in how it's done and it's serving you, not them, but you'll use it as leverage. Another example would be, fine, do whatever you want, but don't be surprised if I'm upset for the rest of the night. So you're acting like they have free reign, like they can make their own decisions, but you're making it not okay every time they ever were to not put your needs first. If they put their own needs first or just have a difference of opinion and decide to go a different route and you make that a problem every single time, it's a form of control because eventually they're just going to, this can happen in some relationships. They stop hanging out with their friends and family because it becomes a problem for their partner. And it could be because it's like, well, I just love you so much and I want to make sure everything's okay and your family doesn't have your back. But ultimately you end up feeling isolated. You end up choosing the connection. So the person who's being controlled will choose the connection over the feelings of guilt. And that's how you end up controlling somebody in a covert way. Also, the statement that I hear a lot is like people say, if you loved me, you would do XYZ, right? If you loved me, it wouldn't be an issue for you just to give me this thing. That's obviously control, right? You're manipulating that person. This includes martyrdom and holding the moral high ground. And this is codependent control. And the reason why it's codependent control is because there's no boundary. It's like they owe you because of all you do for them. And so it's a covert agreement that they never agreed to, but you're holding them to this agreement. Right? There's a transactional understanding of, I've done all this for you. Why can't you just do this for me? And it can actually show up as love or caretaking. You might even feel, as the covert controller, you might feel like you're coming from a place of love. But how you know it's control is when it's transactional, when there's a set of expectations that have been not communicated and have not been agreed upon, but you're going to use it against them later. If you're overfunctioning, this is a great example of like, well, I'm doing all these things around here, and so therefore you owe me, but it's really a false leverage because you're doing those things not because it's an act of service or from a caring place. You're doing it because you want it done a certain way, right? You don't want to allow their preferences or their differences, or they have other variables that they would bring into the equation. You don't want that to interfere with how you want it to be. And if that's the case, and then you use it against them later in the form of all I do for you, that's definitely control because it wasn't something that they ever agreed to in the first place. And it's dishonest, basically, because you did yourself a favor. It was for you, but now you're going to make it sound like it was for them so that you can get your way. Now, number 3, and this might be the least obvious way to engage a power struggle, is to withhold as a form of power. So silent treatment or stonewalling. So in a relationship, there can be blatant and latent, and the blatant person is usually the loud one, the yelling person, the one that's more directly offensive. But the latent person can wield control through these more surreptitious ways. It's not as obvious. They're the quiet ones, so they seem less egregious. But it absolutely is a form of control and manipulation. So an example would be if one partner emotionally shuts down when they're upset and they refuse to talk for hours or maybe even days. They just ignore you or they give you the silent treatment. This will create a power imbalance through avoidance. You're regaining control by withholding what it is that your partner seeks. They want repair, they want understanding, they want to talk about it. And so you're going to remove that option for them. And it's usually coming from, not always, but usually there's a retaliatory component, or it can be a way to avoid feelings of vulnerability. So if you feel out of your depth, if you feel vulnerable and you just don't know what to do, you feel a little bit out of control and scared or vulnerable, you can regain control by shutting down and moving into avoidance. So that's why the avoidant dynamic is so tricky, because it might look like, hey, look, I'm just minding my own business. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not bothering you. But when you're withholding something that's important for connection and there's no negotiation and they don't have any influence over the accessibility of the connection, then you're absolutely controlling, even if it's covert. Now, number 4, and this one factor can really mess up the power dynamics in a relationship, is passive aggression. So this is where you try to exert control indirectly. You have power indirectly because you don't want to stick your neck out. It's not strategic or advantageous to you in your mind to be direct. Maybe you don't want to take the chance that somebody might say no to you if you're direct. So you will orchestrate things in a way to influence or control the outcomes in a way that's not obvious that that's what you're doing. Or if you just make passive aggressive comments, which I'm sure you've heard of, like if you say something like, hey, I saw you did the dishes. I was so surprised, right? So it's like there's a subtext there. The subtext is you don't normally do the dishes. And so there's a little bit of a criticism embedded in that. But if you were to say something about that as the partner receiving that comment, they would probably just deny it and be like, I'm just complimenting you. It's very easy when you're passive aggressive to deny your intention because it's not direct, right? You can't shine your light on it directly. Passive aggression is also verbally denying negative emotions that you are clearly non-verbally communicating. Like, nothing is wrong, I'm not mad, when you're stomping around and slamming doors and you're not making eye contact. So you look mad, but you're denying that you're mad. You are mad, but you're not being honest about it. Or if you crack a mean-spirited joke and then you say, I was just joking, and you're sort of disowning any malicious intention, either to your partner or also to yourself. You might not even be aware that a lot of times partners do that. They're acting out their aggression in this sort of passive aggressive way, and they're not even recognizing it until it gets called out by somebody that they'll hear it from. But when their partner tries to bring it up, they'll deny it to even themselves, and that's really maddening. And another way that you can be passive aggressive is if you agree to something you say yes and you act like you're on board, but then you sabotage it through procrastinating, making tons of mistakes, taking so long, or doing it so poorly that it ends up becoming inconvenient to your partner. So, I mean, weaponized incompetence is a great example of this. It's like you're kind of sabotaging it so that they'll just get to the point where they're like, never mind, I'll just do it. And you don't ever have to take ownership over your decision to basically say no. You've pretended like you've said yes, but you've actually, in your actions, you have said no. And so you're communicating resistance while pretending to be on board. And if you don't fully own your yes because you fear speaking the truth, and then you act it out, and then they bring it up, and then you act like they're reading too much into it, like, what do you mean? And you completely deny it. I think that's really obviously dishonest and hurtful, and it breaches trust in the dynamic. But it also speaks to somewhere, if that's what you're doing, there's a part of you that doesn't feel confident enough or have the core beliefs to support actually owning your no. I actually disagree with that. Here's what I would propose instead. You might feel very disempowered. And passive aggression, that sort of covert control, usually is the domain of people who do see themselves as disempowered, whereas the overt control is the domain of people that see themselves in charge or want to be in charge. The reason I want to talk about this and bring this topic is because I see it all the time, and it is hard to talk about without people feeling bad. Like they don't want to admit it because they feel like that means that they're a horrible person. And that's just not the case. So it's about getting really curious and self-reflecting without any judgment, without any shame, and being compassionate. Where did this come from? Why am I doing this? What am I really defending against? What am I trying to protect? And then taking a really courageous decision to try doing something different to break out of that. So towards that end, I'm going to share with you how you can break out of these power struggles. There are 5 powerful things that you can do to break out of power struggles in your relationship. So the first thing is, when you're dealing with a power struggle, you have to call out the pattern and not the person. So instead of accusing your spouse, which keeps you in sort of an oppositional stance with them, you want to just highlight the pattern as though it's outside of you or your partner. So you could use this phrase as a reset, like, wait, are we power struggling right now? Or this feels like a power struggle. Should we pause right now? So there's no blame. It's just an us place question. It's like taking a 30,000 foot view of the situation and looking down and saying, it looks like we're in a power struggle. And so you're unifying in a way. This externalizes the issue, and it really invites collaboration instead of combat. Another way you could say it is, let's pause. I think we both might be trying to win here, or I think that we're both just trying to convince each other, or I see that we're in gridlock right now. Why don't we just take a pause? So this is really important when it comes to emotional connection and emotional safety in a relationship, is this idea that it's us against the pattern. And it's the basis of teamwork, essentially, right? You can't collaborate or be on the same team unless you can speak in us language. This is what's going on for us. It's not, this is what you're doing, or this is what I'm doing, which is also inside out language is great. I'm going to get into that in a minute. But the most evolved way is to really look at it at pattern interrupt from the us place. Now, the second thing, if you want to break out of power struggles, the key is speaking from the inside out. This means sharing about you and not them. It's so easy to be like, this is what you're doing right now, but it just creates more defensiveness and it feels more combative. So instead of saying something like, you're being really controlling right now, even if that's true, instead of saying that, you can say something like, when I don't feel included in the decisions that you make, I start to feel invisible, and that hurts my feelings, or that makes me want to react. Or an example would be, if there's like a husband that I worked with a while ago, he used to snap when his wife made plans without asking him. He learned to say, I really want to feel like a partner. I really want to feel like I'm considered in your choices. I want to feel like not a passenger in our life together. So he didn't criticize her. He just shared from the I. This is what I'm noticing that I desire more of. And so you're really speaking from your goals or your life dreams, saying something like, I want the kind of relationship where we each hear each other, where we co-create something together and we make sure that it really works for both of us. I'm committed to having a dynamic where what you care about matters and also what I care about matters. Right? So leading with your goals, leading with your vision in a big picture way, it gets you out of that power struggle of me versus you. And the third thing, and I think this is what most couples forget, is this idea of mutual influence. Mutual influence is the single biggest predictor of marital success. When you cannot receive influence from each other, that is when you are in dicey territory. And this is based on John Gottman's research. And there is a gendered component to this actually from his research, but then this was a long time ago, and I think things are evolving now. But as women have been more conditioned to receive influence than men, who are really conditioned to be linear, achieving, autonomous, independent, and pivoting in a relational way is almost a sign of weakness. What he found is that receiving influence as a husband is really a big predictor of success in marriage. But I think it's important, really important for both partners to be able to receive influence from each other and to share that and to have a shared understanding of what that would look like. So this would sound like, would you be open to working on this together? Not, this is the only logical way forward. And if you don't see that, then you're nuts, right? Like, obviously this is the only way. And this is what most people do. I'm going to try to show you why this is the right way. And whenever you try to tell me your way is the right way, I'm going to show you why it's not the right way. And I'm going to go back to saying why. That's what gridlock is, right? You're just continuing to reiterate your same old points and you're not moving out of that. So this is just an extension of what I was talking about in terms of, coming from the us place. That's what mutual influence is. It supports the us place. Like an example would be if instead of arguing over chores, you would just propose a system, right? Like, let's try it this way. So this is how I think we should do it. What do you think? You're seeking their input too. That invites mutual influence. You can also replace comments like, you're not pulling your weight around here, which would be a you statement, to how can we rebalance division of labor? How can we find a more fair way? Because this is not working for me. What do you think would make most sense? Here's what I think makes most sense. You actually never need to argue. Technically, you never need to argue. All you ever need to do is share your vantage point and your opinions, and then the other person does the same, and then you negotiate from there. But if you try to deconstruct or make the other person wrong, you're never going to get anywhere. I'm sure you've had this experience before, but it's so easy to do. And ultimately, this is about collaboration, right? So what you could do is interrupt the control loop by saying something like, are we power struggling right now? Kind of like I mentioned before. What is at stake for you right now? Here's my fear. Here's what's at stake for me. When you can bring that forward and incorporate that and do the same for them, and it doesn't matter if you agree with them or not, you have to incorporate it. That's what collaboration is. Number 4 is that you can get out of power struggles by consciously rebalancing the dynamic, right? So first you have to look at what is the pattern that we're in. So for example, let's say one of you is more of the overt controller and one of you is more of the passive and you're less direct. Maybe one of you is more avoidant and then the other one of you is more of like an angry pursuer and the other one tends to shut down. Whatever your pattern is, you look at that and you choose to disrupt that. So like if you're the overfunctioner in the relationship, you would try to do less and leave space for them to step in more. If you're the underfunctioner, you want to lean in and step up more. If you tend to be one down in the relationship where you're always deferring to your spouse, then a pattern interrupt for you would be to step up more, speak up more, take that risk. If you're the one that's always in control or one-upping or dominating things, then your work would be to come down a little bit and really consciously decide to change what's happening on your side of the street to bring you back into balance. And if both of you are doing that at the same time, it's actually really powerful. Now, you know me by now that one person alone can disrupt the pattern. One person can disrupt that equilibrium that you're in with this, if you're in a polarity of sorts. But when both people are doing it at the same time, that's really magical. But don't wait for the other person to change first. Don't take the stance of like, I'm going to wait for you to do 50% and then I'll do my 50%. Just do 100% for you on what you can do on your side of the street and trust that that will catalyze change. If it doesn't, well, then that's information that's important to have. I think what is the most effective way to break out of power struggles in your relationship permanently is to create conscious agreements going forward that you live by. So this is the last one because I think you want to go through this process in order. You want to already have identified the pattern. You want to have already practiced changing things on your side of the street, practice using I language, practice receiving influence and having that be mutual. Once you've done that, then you can come together and say, let's create a conscious agreement. Let's decide what we want this to look like. What is the power? How are we going to share power in this relationship? And then you want to review them. You want to share your understanding of what the agreement is. You want to state clearly what you're committing to as part of that agreement. What are you going to do to honor the agreement? What are you not going to do to honor the agreement? And you're going to ask things like, okay, what are the things that we need to decide together for us to share power in a way that works for us? What can we decide on our own without checking with the other person? What do we agree on, right? Like it could be a financial thing, like anything over $300 you run by me and vice versa. We both agree to do that. Anything less than that, that, do whatever you want. We have a shared understanding of that. So there's no hurt feelings because it's an agreement that we made. This sort of gets rid of the dangers of a covert agreement that you're holding your spouse to that they never agreed to, is just to bring it to the light, write it down. And then you can also agree on how often are we going to reevaluate it. I think what gets in the way of people coming up with a shared agreement or coming up with a plan is because they worry, am I going to have to stick with this for the rest of my life? I don't even know if this is going to work for me. So I always recommend picking a time frame. Let's just do this for a month. Let's see how it goes. Let's agree to this and we'll do a trial. And then in a month, we'll come back together and we'll say, how is this working for you? Here's how it's working for me. And if we need to recalibrate, we can. But at least it's still shared and it's something you're doing together as opposed to getting mad and going back into a me versus you mentality. You can also do like weekly check-ins to see how it's going. Like, is there anywhere where you felt like I steamrolled you this week? Is there anywhere this week where you feel like I didn't honor the agreement? Where are you at? How are things feeling? And check in about the shifts that you know you've committed to. How are you feeling about your part of the agreement that you've been doing? And just see where you're at. It doesn't mean you have to change it, but what it does is it anchors in the us place. It anchors in that you are a team and that you are consciously and systematically and in a very proactive way scheduling these times, following through, checking in. It does something to your psyche. It makes you know that you are capable of having a very conscious, intentional, healthy relationship and that you're not just going to let the automatic programs decide the fate of your relationship, right? That's depressing when you think about your default modes just running the show, especially if this is something that you can relate to and the default modes are not working for you. It's very empowering to be able to do this. So don't worry about perfection. Don't worry about being locked into something for the rest of your life. Just talk about it, come up with a shared agreement. And if you can't come to a shared agreement in the first conversation, just try it again later. Sometimes it takes more than one conversation. But if you really stick to this idea of like, we're not going to settle for less than something that works for both of us. And we're not going to give up until we find a solution that works for both of us. When you have that mindset, you can come up with creative solutions that you might not have thought of before. The problem, I think, is that people get really hopeless and they give up too soon. So that's it, you guys. With those 5 things, if you can implement these things really intentionally, you'll be able to create a new dynamic together and a marriage 2.0 where you can look back on your power struggles as like a thing of the past. That was then, this is now, and we have something much better. Because remember, power struggles are not really about power. They're really about protection. And if both people are protecting themselves, nobody's protecting the relationship. So step out of the control loop, step into mutual influence, step into the us place, and really open to the possibility of seeing everything change in your relationship in ways that you really couldn't even imagine. You can do that. You can get to a place where it exceeds your expectations. You just have to be willing to go first and actually take the time and not just think about this theoretically, but put it into practice, because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's it for today. If you like my content, please take a second and either like this video or subscribe to my channel or both. That will help us reach the people that really need to hear this stuff.